Bulla, and in this lecture I want to look at the Carnarvon marina developments and why they've got a problem with their silting. I'm not really particularly interested in the actual town or the information about the town. It's more about the general principles of the silting issues and sea level rise and waves and that sort of thing. So let's have a look at that. First of all, the green area is the low, shallow, silty area that's building up. And in building up, it stops the boats going from their little marina here, down the river, and then out into the deeper ocean. This is a sort of a gentle river, and you can see the waves are coming in from here. So the wind is pushing the waves up against this sandy area here. And in doing so, of course, the waves are sort of getting shaped by this. So they'll be coming in pretty much straight, but then they'll get shaped as they get closer. They'll get shaped by the land here. And in doing so, the longshore drift of the sand here will start to go zigzag, 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 and head down the coast, and eventually then it tumbles out and forms this little sort of a little hook, and some of the sand then gets pushed across to this little island, and then eventually little particles will make their way, sort of down the coast, depending on the flow of the ocean. But the important thing here is to know that it's normally kept fairly open because there's initially nothing to stop the sand from just building up and closing off this river, but the river itself keeps opening it up. So in times of flooding, for instance, you might get a big flood come down and dig out all the sand and wash it all out to the deeper ocean here. But the problem is this sand's been building up here and it's becoming so shallow that they can't get their boats out. Why is that the case? So the explanation here that I'm after from you is not specific to the town here, but it's really showing some of the things that you should be thinking about. You should be thinking about, for instance, why the sand is potentially coming down and closing off this, and to do with the longshore drift. You should mention that. You should then also perhaps think of climate change, because that was mentioned in the question, and the fact that the person had talked about climate change being an issue and that in recent years this event had been happening more and more. So what does climate change do? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, the sea level rise is only small, but it has a big effect in a place like this, where it's very low set, and the moving of the sand can have a big effect. So just a small amount of sea level rise will dig out a lot more sand up here and deposit it down here and also within the harbour front here. So that's one area, sea level rise, causing extra sand to move. Another part of climate change is difference in rainfall. So sometimes you'll get less rainfall and sometimes more rainfall. In other words, you get more bigger events happening, longer droughts, higher intensity cyclones, that sort of thing. So what happens here is that tends to have a big effect on these rivers. If it's a drought situation, which it has been for some parts of these areas, the drought situation means the flow of water coming down is reduced, all right? It flattens out. So that means that a lot of particles that would have got initially washed out to sea and end up down in the deep ocean, they don't have that water to do that. And so they just gradually, slowly but surely, just start settling down in the bay here nice and calmly. And it's essentially only going to be a big flood event that's going to move them all out. The other big issue which some of you recognised was that there's been a disturbance in some of the banks of the river and also the general area. And this is a major problem for places like Australia and a little bit for Fiji. And that's where you get cattle and livestock and other things like that essentially destroying the banks of the river. And a lot of the sediment now is able to, with a small amount of rain, run off into the river where previously it wasn't. So the bank itself, the river bank, was much more stable and could collect the sediment and trap it and keep it out of the river. But in some of these rivers now, they've become very silted up. And the Murray River, which is the biggest one in Australia, the Murray River now, there's times when you can walk across the entrance. In other words, you can walk across here, the biggest river in Australia, and you can just walk across because it's so silted up. And it really does need a flooding event to move all this sediment out of the way. And a lot of the sediments come from all the farming and agriculture up higher. So the question then, the second part of the question is what to do. And here you guys did a really good job. Some people said, well, we could build a rock wall or something. So maybe at some point here, maybe here, you build some sort of groin or some sort of rock wall which stops the flow of the sand coming down, which will then kind of open up this area a bit here to the flow. Other people talked about dredging, and dredging is actually a good idea. In fact, you may even be surprised to know that was the end-up solution, is that they did get a dredging machine and they dredged out some of the river here so the boats could continue to use it. So dredging, it's sort of okay. It's expensive and it's short-term, but it can work. Other options are trying to get the river to stop collapsing from the banks, all that sediment collapsing into the river, trying to stabilise it with plants, even from mangroves right through to other trees and things, and that was suggested. Well done. And another option that some people point out was to perhaps, rather than go all this way down here, maybe cut through here, make a new channel which is out of the way of this. And that's actually not such a stupid idea, because if it's done properly, you could put a channel just where it should be, rather than at the moment it's sort of in a funny spot. So maybe that's not a bad idea as well. But certainly stopping the sand from moving, trying to stabilise this or remove it, or putting in a different type of channel, like you might put a channel here, are three really good options. In all these cases, though, you've got to also think about what the costing is here, and that wasn't part of the question. But when you, as a professional, start to look at these things, you can do anything if you have enough money. But there are some things that are more effective than others. And one of the problems with this rock wall is it will eventually fall apart and you'll have to redo it. So that's a big capital expense there. Dredging, that's probably every year or two. That's pretty expensive as well. Building a new channel is also not so good. Okay, thanks, Banaka.